guys, welcome back. As you can see, we are in our new little studio that we've created, nice and cozy. We're excited about today. We are talking all about intuition and how our intuition can actually bring us to very uncomfortable situations. So, Tony and I will have a chat about this, and I want you to listen as you're listening to this episode. Think, has this ever happened to me before in my life? And did I resist against it or did I trust it?
Yeah,
So,
so it reminds me before I moved to Tampa,
yeah.
I was talking on the phone with you. It was back in December 2010. And after we got off the phone, we knew we had to be with each other. Some people know that story. And all of a sudden, I was like, I'm moving to Tampa. Like intuitively, I just knew I need to move to Tampa. Exciting. It felt really good. Maybe a little nerves in the moment. But then once I moved to Tampa, and over these last 13 years, lots of uncomfortable situations for me. And
Yeah.
looking back, the more uncomfortable the situation was, the more strength I earned from it, the more strength I received from it by going through it, by following that intuitive nudge, trusting my intuition, and then doing the journey, slaying my dragons, doing what needs to be done.
Right. And didn't you find during that moment, I remember when that happened, when you were moving down, when we started talking on the phone and we had never met in person. I was just thinking about this the other day. And we didn't check in to ask anyone's opinion. Like our intuition, our heart was guiding us no matter what. We were just excited to share it. And people that heard the story actually felt emotional and felt like logically it wouldn't make sense. Some person coming down to visit Florida, you never met him in your entire life. We were in the same energetic field. We knew each other through Nick, but we had never met like physically. I think you saw me at the funeral. I think you said, right?
Yeah, I saw you for a moment, but we've never even met
And
at the funeral, so I didn't know
right.
anything about you in that way.
So logically, it wouldn't make sense. We knew the importance that we had to be together just from the voice connection. At that point, there was no FaceTime. There was none of that. There was Tango, but we agreed we weren't going to use Tango video conferencing until we actually met in person. Do you remember that?
Yes.
So we would talk on the phone. But I remember telling my mom, and I know you told your mom, and my mom knew that Nick sent you to me. Like knew that we were it was a connection of heaven sent stuff that was orchestrated for us.
Yes, and my mom knew too. My
And your
mom knew.
mom
My mom could
felt
just tell by my energy, and at that point, I had been single for about 4 years, so she just knew with how I was showing up. She was like, "Wait, this is something serious." And like you said, my mom, she was the only person I told at the very beginning of it. Logically, these intuitive decisions that we make throughout our life, they don't make
no.
sense. A lot of times, like that doesn't make sense. I never met you in person. How would I know that I need to be with you? I'm going to move 1,000 miles away.
Mhm.
I'm going to make all these new decisions from this. Like logically, if I wrote it down on paper, it wouldn't make sense. And I think that's what stops a lot of people
Right.
is they get these intuitive nudges like, I want to do mediumship, or I want to go full time in a mediumship, or whatever the intuitive nudge is. I need to move to a new city. And then
Or start your own
logically, or
business.
start your own business. And then logically, you start to get in your brain, which there's value there.
Yeah.
Like along the way, once I made my intuitive decision to move to Tampa, I had to use logic along the way. Like we had to figure out what apartment we're going to stay in that, when I first got there, all these
Mhm.
little things. But it's like knowing when to use logic and knowing when to just trust your intuition and don't get caught up in what Tony Robbins calls the tyranny of how.
Yeah.
If you get caught up in how, like from that intuitive decision, that's where we found working with thousands of clients at this point, that's what stops most people from doing whatever their vision is telling them to do is they get caught up in logic.
Yes. And the biggest thing with intuition, it's speed. It really is speed because when you're intuitively being guided, like you just shared how you moved to Tampa, how we knew, there was do you know the amount of time that it took us to know? I think we spoke on December 6th. You flew down before New Year's Eve, right? So that was less than a month later. We set up things. It happened. And then was it 8 months later that you moved to Tampa after that?
Yes.
but we would travel back and forth, and we just knew there was no question at all. And it always happens with speed. We've talked to tons of clients, whether it's coaching or me giving readings or students, and they're like, this is so crazy. I just know that I have to move to this place, or I know I have to take this step, even though I don't even know how, like you just mentioned, like Tony Robbins shares. I'm going to make it happen. And I think that's the difference with people that are like listening to their intuition, but then there's another group of people that just follow their intuition. So you can listen to it, like you hear it, you get the nudge, but you're not actually following it and like taking that action step. The people that are taking quick steps, they make things happen fast because it's not really about them. They're being guided, whether you want to call it God, universe, energetic force that's guiding them. Um, and they're listening to that nudge, and they're following the direction. So I feel like that's the difference.
It is, and you reap rewards from it. Like when, like, to think about a parent that gives a kid advice, like, hey, you should do this. Like, don't touch the stove because it's going to burn you. And the
Yeah.
kid listens. You build trust. It's the same thing with us trusting our intuition. As we trust our intuition, you're building trust with God. You're building trust with the universe, with something deeper than yourself. And you start to build this momentum. And it gets easier and easier and easier. Like, we could think of several other intuitive decisions that we've made over the last 13 years
Yeah.
together. One being we were both public school teachers, and all of a sudden we got the intuitive nudge, you need to start your own education business, which we were getting that at the very beginning of our relationship. We were talking about this. We knew, we kept saying, what was our phrase? We're going to travel around the world and impact lives. And we knew that meant online, in person, and it had to do with our own business.
Yeah.
But all those details started to fill in over time as we trusted and we took an action step, right? First you left teaching, and then you went full time to your business.
Yeah.
And then I taught for the next several years, and then eventually I left teaching, and we kept trusting this intuitive process. Once again, me leaving teaching after I taught 3 years in the public school, so I spent, you know, tens of thousands of dollars to get an education to be a teacher, and then I quit teaching after 3 years. Logically, that doesn't make sense. Logically, it didn't make sense for you either, because I think you know, about receiving tenure and all of that, and you were about 8 years in. So a lot of the logic didn't make sense for you leaving teaching as well. But since we were trusting that intuitive decision, even the years leading up to that, we had a stronger intuition, we'll say, at that point, because we kept trusting it. And that's the only way that you build your intuition,
Yeah.
is you trust it, and then you take action. You slay your dragons on your journey. You go through that pain, and then you do it again, and you repeat it. And I think a lot of times people get caught up in, oh, I got this intuitive nudge, and then they unconsciously know that they have to slay dragons after that, and then they stop themselves,
Right.
which stops the momentum, which decreases your trust, which decreases the relationship you have with you and that higher thing.
Yeah, and it's overwhelming. Like when you get that intuitive feeling, it's almost like, well, wait, where do I start? I think that's what happened to me with certain aspects of like my mission at the beginning was, well, how am I going to figure out how to do technology to start the video course? And it was almost like I needed coaches or people on the way, the people that had the faith in me, where I was like, oh, I'll just put this off because I don't know the technology. I'll just put it off. And then I told you about a situation that came up with my business, and I went out to lunch with one of my friends, and she's like, so what's your next step? You were a teacher, so what are you going to do aside from readings? I'm like, well, I want to teach, but I have to figure out the technology. She's like, no, I'm not going to let you just wait. Like, this is easy. Once you get it down, like, just take the first step. Like, it doesn't have to be this fancy studio to start. But, it's making me think about intuitive nudges. And I don't even know what I was doing at this point. I was probably scrolling online a couple of days ago, and I heard Ramsey, the guy that talks
Dave
about
Ramsey.
like Dave Ramsey. And he was doing a podcast episode or whatever. He was talking with callers that were calling in, and this guy called in, and he's like, I'm really in a tough situation. I have a bunch of debt right now. I think he had like over $150,000 in debt. He was going to be a doctor, and his test wasn't being passed. So he tried it for 3 years, and he didn't pass the test. you could tell in his voice he really didn't have the drive to be a doctor. Ramsey didn't talk about that, but he's like, well, can you take the test again? Or can you do this again? Can you go and use your doctor's, like the content that you learned from there? Can you be a nurse? And he's like, right now I'm substitute teaching. And of course he was frustrated with taking the test and not passing it. I understand that feeling. But you could tell in his voice intuitively, he wasn't into it anymore. He didn't want to figure it out. He had to figure out his money situation, but it wasn't working for him. And I think that sometimes we get stuck, like we talked about going to school as teachers. We took out the student loans at the time. We did all of these things, but we didn't let that change our intuition when we knew we're going to do this for a little bit and then we're going to go into our business.
Well, yeah, I mean, how many times does that happen with our programs that we're running,
right.
with mediums or coaches that are wanting to go full time in their business, and they're like, well, I've been in this corporate job for 15 years and I only need, 3 more years to get whatever it is, right? To get this insurance or to get this bonus or to get this position that I worked decades for. But my intuitive nudge is telling me, no, like I need to do full-time mediumship right now. So there's that conflict between logic and intuition.
Right.
And so many times, more times than not, the logic wins because, right, we're survival. Like we need money to eat. We need to survive. We need a house to live in. So a lot of times when people go in fight or flight mode, they make that decision out of logic. And it, time passes. Now all of a sudden 5 years, 10 years pass, that same person that's working that corporate job, that's maybe they're building their mediumship business part-time, but another 10 years pass and they know that they want to go full-time with their mediumship. And then another 5 years pass. And before you know it, 20 years have passed. And we've seen this with clients that have joined our free classes over the last, several years. Some clients, they make that intuitive decision to where they're like, I'm going to join that program.
Right.
Even though I'm scared, even though all of this, my intuition is telling me that I need to join this. And then others are like, my intuition's telling me this, but then the logic, time, I have a family, I have this job, I don't even know if I want to do this full time, all of these different questions. And they're in the same space again. They'll show up on another free class. And I'm not, trying to put a guilt trip on these people or shaming them. It's you listening right now. It's a reality. Like, do you want to follow those intuitive decisions that you know that you need to make right now that you've been putting off? Do you want to put those off another year, another 5 years? Or do you want to just do what we all do? We're all humans. We feel these fears. And sometimes we think that other people aren't feeling those fears. That's why they're taking those intuitive decisions.
Right.
No, just know that we're all feeling these fears. Some just decide to follow that intuitive nudge and continue to follow it and do things even if they're scared, feel the fear and do it anyways. And then others decide to just let that logic, let that brain, let that lizard brain, that fight or flight mode take over, and they continue to live the same way that they've been living.
Yeah. True. And I think that what you're saying is, it kind of goes off of, sometimes we get these intuitive nudges, but it's important to explore it. Just because you get an intuitive nudge doesn't mean it's forever either. Does that make sense? It's like sometimes you get the intuitive nudge to take a class that deals with mediumship and investigations, but that doesn't mean that you're going to go and work with the detective at that point forever. You might be getting the knowledge to build up your skill set for when you give a reading to a private client. So I think that that's the big thing. People get stuck like, well, my intuition told me to go date this guy, or my intuition told me to go and take the class, but what happened with it? Like, where did it go? There's always little lessons in these moments that we're guided to have too.
Yeah, and usually people that are saying something like that, they've stopped following their intuition for a time, and that's why they're saying that.
Yeah.
If you just keep, like anybody I could look back, you can look back in your life, and maybe you worked at a job, like maybe the job when you were a fairy in the mall.
Yeah.
At the time, your intuition or something told you, like, hey, you need to be a fairy in the mall because you need money.
It was my friend was doing it,
right?
And I was like, oh, I'll just do it. I'm like, oh my God. Well, I want to do tea parties.
And sometimes
they said you have to do the mall first. I'm like, okay.
So there it is. It's sometimes you don't see the lessons that you're learning right then.
Oh
It's like
yeah.
Steve Jobs. He always says you could only, you can only see the patterns looking back. He said it's something like that. Like you could only connect the dots looking back. So many times our intuition is telling us to go here, to do this. Like me with my lawn care business when I was younger. Thank God I did that because it taught me organization. It taught me marketing. It taught me like going through the common pains that all entrepreneurs go through,
Yeah.
right? I went through it at a younger age, which helps me now, right? So sometimes we're pulled to take that detective class or even a painting class or a singing class. You took a singing class
I
several years
know.
ago, and it's for a reason. Maybe it's to develop your voice.
Yeah. Well, and I'm thinking of the fairy job because it just triggered something in my mind where it built belief in me, and I didn't think about that until you just mentioned it. Because the boss, she was like, "I don't understand. Like, what are you doing differently? You're selling so many fairy dust things." But it was just natural for me because I was a third grade teacher at the time. Oh no, it was before I was interning, I think, at that point.
Still teacher mode.
Yeah, teacher mode. I loved the kids, but it was also easy for me to sell. It smelled good. It was organic, and I wasn't afraid to talk to people and have them come up to the little kiosk. So she's like, "What are you doing?" And I'm just like, I it built up the confidence to show that the numbers were very high, and that confidence, that little burst of confidence from that fairy job, and then other jobs that I've had, I guess it's built up over time, even with the work that we do now too.
It is,
Because when I believe in something, I love selling it because I'm serving people by sharing it.
and you do that in your everyday life. Like you sell floss, you sell what else is there?
I
There's
just told my facial lady about the floss yesterday
mini
too.
trampolines,
Everything I love, I just love
nutrition
sharing it.
plans, exactly, and that's valuable because you're following your heart. Once again, you're following your
Right.
instinct. I love this. I want to share this, and then now in your business, which being a psychic medium, doing work that's right, you're a pioneer. You're blazing your own
Mm-hmm.
trail, right? Majority of the world, they still don't understand this all the way. So you really have to believe in what you're doing, right? And you really
Yeah,
have to trust that.
and it's not
So
overnight either.
it's not overnight, and I could see how like the fairy dust at the mall and the the floss and all of these
Mm-hmm.
things building up. Like, oh no, I believe in this. This works for me. Doing the same thing in your mediumship.
And I
So
think that's important too, is like that belief and that faith. Sometimes you have to build it up. You get the intuitive nudge. It feels uncomfortable and you have to psych yourself up to get it done. Like even when it feels uncomfortable, if you don't have that naturally in you. I feel like when you're in your power when it comes to trusting intuition and you just do it, you don't need to psych yourself up. You get that passion
you
and
just
that
know.
power, it just comes up.
You just know it's easy making decisions now for me, for
Right.
you,
And
out of
I
our intuition. It's easy. You just know it's a feeling that comes over, and you're just like, no, I got to
and the
go with
people
this.
that need to build that up that don't have that skill, because I didn't have that right away. I am trying to think of like, where did that come from? Like what I think for me, it was like the spiritual awakening that took place. I'm like, I'm making quick decisions. I'm only doing what I want. I'm not going to do things that I don't want to do anymore. I don't have energy to do anything for anyone else that doesn't feel right for me. That taught me a lot, because I had no energy to give at that point. Like I was going through my own grief. Before that, I was very indecisive. Like I'm trying to think of what I was indecisive about, but there were moments where I was very indecisive before that, and it took grief to realize that no, I'm going to do what I need to do for me, because if I don't, I'm going to be drained, I'm going to be agitated, and I have nothing to give to people.
Well, you were a people pleaser, and I was a
Yeah.
people pleaser too for many years, and I never wanted to say no to people. I could tell when I was around them if they wanted me to say yes or no, whatever the answer was,
Being
and
empathic, we would know that too.
and I would do that, right? And then eventually, you get to a point to where you do that so much that you feel beat up by the world, and then you get a point to where you're angry. You're like,
Yeah.
fuck this. I'm going to
I'm
say
not going to
yes
be
to
taken
things I want to
advantage
say
of.
yes to. I'm going to say no to things I want to say no to. And then you start to use your intuition with that.
Right.
And that's what you start to practice over time. And I've started to practice over time. And we're really good at it now. Sometimes we have to say no to people when they want us to say yes. and it leads to an uncomfortable situation because we're saying no to them, and then now all
Mm-hmm.
of a sudden their feelings are hurt. We'll feel the vibes from them, and it can be uncomfortable, right? Especially when those same people are used to you saying yes all the time.
Right.
So you got to break that cycle. So even just something as simple as saying yes or no, like, hey, we all want to come over to your house for a barbecue this weekend. Can we bring the whole family? Right? And then you're like, I've had enough people recently. I just want to say no to this, right? I don't want to, and then you have to say no, right? But it sounds funny, but it's like your intuition is always playing a role.
Yeah.
There's a reason why you feel in your heart and soul that you need to say no
Mm-hmm.
or that you need to say yes.
And sometimes you find out after,
And you'll
right?
find out after. But as you get good with this, it's like chess.
Before you know
You're
it.
like 40 steps ahead because now, like, I trust my feeling every time now. Every
Mm-hmm.
time, well, maybe not that, right. We're not perfect. We're not human. But most of the time, like, no, that's a no. That's a
Mm-hmm.
yes. Like, I don't care
In your
anymore.
common phrases, it's either a
Hell yes or hell no, which I got from one of my mentors. And
yeah,
that's what it needs to be. Because if
yeah,
it's not, you're in the middle of maybe. And whenever you have all these maybes, it's draining your energy.
right.
If you don't get good at making these yes and nos with the simplest things in life, you'll never get good at saying the yes and nos with the big things in life. Like
That
a,
is
like
true.
like an example that we have is whenever we did our short-term rental in St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
Here it is in the middle of a pandemic.
Right.
Pandemic.
Winter.
It's the winter. Um,
It's the
many
slowest
people are,
month average for Airbnbs,
the
actually.
slowest month. Many people around us are saying you can't even do an Airbnb in that neighborhood because we had a specific neighborhood in St. Charles we wanted to do it in, just in St. Louis, Missouri. We had all these things on the outside, but we knew in our
We
hearts and
knew.
souls. Of course, we had been building that vision for at that point almost a decade, talking
Mm-hmm.
about it. Like we knew we were gonna have a house in St. Louis. It would be a short-term rental. So we were very clear. That was another key. We got very clear in our mind. But at that point in 2020, October hit. We were driving somewhere in Florida. It was in the middle of a
Yeah.
highway, and it hit us. We're like, it's time for us to get that St. Louis house. We just knew in our soul. Everything on the outside
And
did
then in
not
December,
say
we
it.
closed.
In December, we closed.
So we started looking. I think we found the place. You found that specific one in November, I think it
It was
was.
November. And most people would have said at that time, that's silly. It doesn't make sense.
We were in Florida. It was in Missouri.
Now, looking back, like every intuitive decision, you can see why. We can see why
Right.
we were pulled to do it during that time.
And
Like
it
lower
was a
percentage
success.
rates. The price was cheaper. The house that we specifically got in the heart of the neighborhood we wanted. Like, what are the odds of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
All of these things line up, but it goes to the universe. Life is happening for you. And as you start to build that trust in it, in that phrase, life is happening for you,
Mm-hmm.
you start to trust your intuition and you start to make these decisions and you start to play chess while everybody else is playing checkers, while everybody else is playing this other game. You're 40 steps ahead,
Mm-hmm.
which gives you an edge, which can help you have a bigger impact on the world, a bigger impact on yourself and the people around you.
Yeah. And it's all about trusting those little steps. It is like chess. We always share that example like, wait, why don't you do this way? We're playing chess. We're doing it the long way, that we have to do these things because we can see ahead on what's going to be
Yes.
the end result.
We're doing it
So,
my way,
right.
right? My way,
Exactly.
our way.
So, what we want to ask you is what area do you find that you are wanting to pay attention to your intuition with? Like you've heard the intuitive nudge and you want to follow it. What area or what area have you done that with? Maybe you're thinking, wait, there was a time that I had this intuitive nudge and I didn't listen to it. What was the result of that? Okay? So we can't wait to see you next episode. Bye.